Hey guys, this is Chumdal here with another first impression of the Kizer Begleiter. I'm not actually sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but I recently picked up a new knife. This is one of the budget-friendly knives, and so it usually runs for around $59. The blade seal is VG10, the handle is G10, and it has steel liners. So yeah, I'll get started with my first impressions. Well, before we do that, let's first take a look at this knife compared to other knives. So here's a mini griptilian. I'll show you with the ruler as well. So here it's about lined up. Here's the mini griptilian. I'll show you guys the Osborne. So yeah, it's about the same size as the Osborne, definitely much smaller than the mini griptilian. I'll show you guys next to the PM3. So next to the PM3, you can see that the handle length is slightly smaller, the blade length is significantly smaller. Just a few more. So here's the Hogue Mini RSK, basically the same size as the mini grip. And how about one last one? Here's the Zero Tolerance 0450, so similarly smaller knife. So this is a relatively big knife. It's not the biggest knife, but it's not small by any means either. We can get some measurements. You can see that the blade length is about 3.5. Handle length is basically 4.5 inches, and it's, let's see how thick it is. Thickness is about 12 millimeters, so 1.2 centimeters. If we look at the blade stock, it's 3 millimeters. So on Blade HQ, it says that the blade thickness is 0.13 inches, so it's probably pretty accurate. So now onto the knife itself. When looking at the knife, the blade handle and the blade itself, we can see that the blade is full flat grind. So it's actually pretty slicey. The blade thickness is at the top is pretty thick. It's because it's 0.13, but then as you get to the very bottom, you can feel that it's pretty thin. So when compared to the Mini RSK, which is usually considered to be a really slicey knife, it feels like they're really similar. I can't tell exactly which one's thicker than which, but they're pretty much the same, I would say. Now, when you look at the blade stock, we can also see that it maintains the same thickness up until this point, which is probably around 70%, and then it starts to taper down. So the tip is pretty thin, and it's also very thin as well. So it's not super thick behind the edge at the tip, which a lot of knives do tend to get thicker at the tip. Even when looking at the Mini RSK, although it's very thin at the base, when we look at the tip and we feel it, you can feel that it's significantly thicker. So now moving on, when we look at the thumb stud is pressed in. It's not like some other knives, like the Benchmade knives, where thumb studs are usually removable. From what I can see, it's not removable, it's pressed in. And the blade is VG10, which is a pretty good steal for this price range, so I don't have anything to complain about there. Now moving on to the pivot. So the action of the knife is pretty smooth. It doesn't run on ball bearings. It runs on phosphor bronze washers, so it doesn't have a drop shut action, but I wouldn't say really smooth, but I would think that it's relatively smooth for the price range, and it's a pretty nice action, I would say. The lockup we can see on my unit, it's about 40%, maybe 50%. So yeah. And then when looking at the pivot has a pretty nice blue accent to it on the other side as well. So the center is just typical chrome, and the outside there's a ring of blue anodization, which makes it look a lot more upscale. And the overall look of the knife is pretty elegant. It's really thin and smooth. The top line, it just goes all the way through. Right here, it's, I wouldn't say completely flat. That might just be bad tolerances, but other than that, it's pretty straight on the top. The bottom, the line is also pretty straight all along. And the handle, although it's a very simple handle, it does feel very nice in the hand. It doesn't feel like it's really going to go anywhere. Although I would say that maybe the top could use a little bit of jimping. Now, other than that, I don't think the bottom needs too much jimping. I think it's okay there. And one thing that I feel does make this knife a little unique compared to many other knives that I've handled is that the G10, it doesn't actually go all the way around. So if you feel the top, what you actually feel and what's protruding is the stainless steel liner. It's not actually the G10. So when you're gripping the knife like this, what you feel is predominantly the steel liner and not the G10. And speaking of the liner, we can see inside that it's been milled out on one side. On this side, on the lock side, there's no milling, but on the other side, there's just a tiny bit of milling to help reduce the weight, since otherwise the knife would be relatively hefty. Yeah. Looking at the centering, it's not actually very centered. It's pretty obvious that it's off to the right. I tried fixing it with typical and standard methods of centering the blade, but none of those really fixed it. So I think it's just a tolerance issue, and that is expected for a $60 knife. Yeah, other than that, the pocket clip, it does look a little cheap, and I don't think that it's the highest quality. It feels okay, but in use, I haven't found it to be too big of a problem. I do wish that it was slightly thicker though, but I guess visually, if it were thicker, it wouldn't look as fitting for this specific knife. So before I continue to go use it and come back with my final review, I think from my first impressions, it's a pretty good knife for the price. I don't think you could go wrong with this knife. Obviously, you can't compare this knife to more expensive knives that are in the $100 to $200 range or anything above that. But in this price range, it's a pretty good knife if you don't mind it being a Chinese manufacturer and you don't mind that this knife may have more flaws and more manufacturing issues than maybe a $400 Sebenza. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with my review.